Rain was always part of my life. It greeted me when I was born in a rusted trailer outside Tulsa and stuck around like an old friend through every hardship. But that night, it wasn't just water falling from the sky. It was fate. Washing everything I thought I knew down the gutter and replacing it with something far greater. I was 24, grease-stained hands, torn jeans, and a wallet thinner than a paper towel. I owned a tiny auto shop, more of a shed with a roof that whined louder than a customer's engine whenever it rained. Business was slow, and debts were faster than my socket wrench. Still, I worked late into the evening, determined to prove I wasn't just another nobody with a wrench. My father, God rest his soul, used to tell me, "Fix more than cars, son. Fix people when you can. That's what makes a real man." That night, the storm hit hard. Lightning split the sky like a crack in the earth. I was about to close up when I heard it, the faint sound of sobbing carried by the wind. It wasn't the kind of cry you ignore. It sounded like broken glass wrapped in silence. I stepped out and followed the noise. A few blocks away, behind the old train yard, I found her. She was chained, literally chained, to a lamppost, soaked to the bone, shivering like a leaf in a hurricane. Her dress clung to her like wet paper, and her bare feet were muddy and scraped. "Miss, are you okay?" I asked cautiously. She looked up. Her eyes, sharp blue, full of fear, met mine. "Please," she whispered. "Help me." No one else was around. No cameras, no cops. Just her, me, and a heart that didn't think twice. I pulled out my crowbar and snapped the lock off the chain. She collapsed into my arms like she hadn't been touched in years. I didn't ask questions. I just carried her back to my shop, laid her gently on the old recliner in the office, and covered her with the cleanest rag I could find. For hours, she didn't speak. But I could see it in her eyes. She wasn't just scared. She was hiding. Part 2. The Girl with No Name. She woke the next morning and sat up slowly, scanning the room like someone trained to spot threats. She was bruised, but nothing seemed broken. I handed her a warm cup of instant coffee and said, "You're safe here." She gave me a cautious nod. "Thank you." I don't know what to say. "Start with your name." A long pause. Then, "Let's just say." "I'm nobody important," I smirked. "That's funny. Me too." For the next few days, she stayed hidden in my garage. I gave her the cot while I crashed on the concrete with a toolbox for a pillow. She started to open up, little by little. She told me her name was Clara. She'd been taken from a private compound on the edge of the city. Something about family inheritance disputes, step-siblings who didn't want her to talk, and a controlling uncle with influence over police and media. It sounded insane, like some soap opera gone rogue. But she had the scars to prove it. And something else. Poise. Even in her most fragile moments, Clara spoke like someone who'd walked through mansions barefoot, seen boardrooms filled with snakes, and still survived. I couldn't help it. I started to feel protective of her. The kind of protectiveness that doesn't ask for anything in return. Not even gratitude. She asked why I ran this dingy garage instead of getting a real job. I could have gone corporate, I said. Had offers. But that's not freedom. I like fixing things on my terms. I built this from scratch. Might be small, but it's mine. She looked impressed. "You have no idea how rare that is." We started spending our evenings talking about dreams. I told her I wanted to build a franchise, affordable garages in low-income neighborhoods, not just to fix cars, but to train people like me, who got overlooked by college counselors and forgotten by society. She listened. Really listened. Not with pity, but with respect. Then one night, she disappeared. Part 3. The revealee searched the entire city. I even went to the compound she'd mentioned. It was real, and crawling with security. I couldn't get within 100 feet without a warning. I thought I'd never see her again. Weeks passed. Business stayed slow. My landlord threatened eviction. The bank froze my account over a missed payment. I was about to shut down for good when a black SUV pulled up outside the garage. A man in a suit stepped out. Behind him, Clara. But this wasn't the same girl I found in the rain. She was dressed like royalty. A diamond pendant around her neck, designer coat, high heels, and her confidence. It could move mountains. "Clara," I whispered. She smiled gently. "You didn't think I'd forget you, did you?" The suited man introduced himself as a legal advisor to the Langford estate. Apparently, Clara was Clara Langford, heiress to a billion-dollar industrial empire, kidnapped by her own stepfamily during a succession dispute. She had recently regained control after the court sided with her, thanks in part to her testimony, and the security footage I unknowingly had in my garage. "I owe you everything," she said. "You didn't just save me, you reminded me what decency looks like." Then she handed me an envelope. Inside was a check with more zeros than I'd ever seen in my life. "I don't want your money," I said, pushing it back. She placed her hand on mine. "This isn't charity. It's a partnership." Part 4. From Greece to Gold. With Clara's backing, my vision exploded. We opened our first full-service garage in East Tulsa, employing 10 former felons and young mechanics who'd dropped out of high school. Every employee got training, mentorship, and a real stake in the business. Clara used her influence to get us low-interest loans, media coverage, and licensing deals. I built the brand, True Torque, on grit and second chances. We became the fastest-growing ethical auto chain in the Midwest. But the money was never the point. It was the lives we changed. The kid who once slept in his car but now owned a house. The single mom who learned to fix brakes and now runs 3 shops. The veterans who found dignity turning wrenches instead of begging for jobs. As for Clara and me, we didn't rush into anything. But one day she showed up at my office with a chain, the same one I'd broken off her wrist that rainy night, and said, "This is our past. Let's forge our future." I melted it into a keychain that still hangs in my office. Years later, as we stood on the stage of a national entrepreneur summit, she in a tailored suit, me in a leather apron, we told our story. Not of wealth, but of worth. I wasn't born rich. I didn't have connections, but I had hands willing to work, a heart that didn't give up, and one night in the rain that changed everything. So if you're watching this and feel like you're stuck, overlooked, or invisible, remember this. Sometimes all it takes is helping a stranger in the storm, because you never know who's waiting to help you fly. I woke before the sun, like always. Years of being broke conditioned me to hustle before the world even stretched its arms. But that morning, I didn't reach for my wrench. I reached for silence, listening. She was still here. I stepped quietly into the office where I'd laid her the night before. She was curled up, damp, but breathing steadily, her hand clutching the blanket like it was a lifeline. Her face, now that it wasn't twisted in fear, was striking. Not movie star glamorous, but dignified, proud. Even in sleep, she looked like someone who carried burdens too heavy for her frame. When she stirred, she jumped, startled. "Easy," I said, offering her a chipped mug of reheated coffee. No chains, no cops. Just a guy with bad coffee and worse luck. She took it with both hands, her eyes darting around, absorbing every inch of the room like she was mapping her exit. "Where am I?" "Freedom Motors," I said. "It's not exactly the Hilton, but it's honest. You passed out. I figured you needed a place to dry off." Her lips parted, but no sound came out. She blinked rapidly, processing. "You don't have to tell me anything," I added quickly. "But you looked like you hadn't had a decent night's sleep in weeks." "I haven't," she said hoarsely. "Thank you for last night." I nodded. Anytime. She didn't say much else that day. Just sat in the corner, silent, watching me fix up a busted carburetor like it was the most fascinating thing on earth. But there was something about the way she looked, not just at the machines, but at me, like she wasn't just grateful. She was studying. By evening, she spoke again. "I need a new name," she whispered. I looked up from the engine I was working on. "New name?" "I can't be who I was. It's not safe." I dried my hands on a rag and sat beside her. "Then we'll pick one, something that makes you feel like you're not running anymore." She hesitated, then whispered, "Clara." "Clara," I repeated. "Fits you." She gave the faintest smile. "You think so?" "Yeah," I said. "It sounds like someone who survived." A new routine. The days that followed were unlike anything I'd experienced. Clara wasn't just hiding, she was healing. Slowly, cautiously. I learned she read voraciously. She devoured the dusty old books I kept on a shelf no one had touched. In years, manuals, biographies, even my dog-eared copy of Think and Grow Rich. She asked 100 questions about my life, about cars, about why people gave up too early on their dreams. She never talked about her own past, at least not directly. But the clues were there. She flinched at sirens. She refused to sleep unless the door was locked. And she had this habit of tracing invisible patterns on the table, like her mind was always working equations only she could see. One night over stale pizza she asked, "Why didn't you call the cops when you found me?" I shrugged. "Didn't seem like they were your friends." "They weren't," she said. "They knew who I was, but they were paid not to care." She didn't elaborate. But she didn't need to. I was raised in a world where people with money made the rules, and broke them without consequence. But Clara, she hadn't just witnessed corruption. She'd escaped it. She asked about my dreams, so I told her. I want to build a chain of garages, not fancy ones. Neighborhood shops, places where people like me, who couldn't afford college or didn't come from much, can learn, work, and earn a future. Her eyes lit up. "You ever write that down?" I laughed. "What for?" "Because visions need structure. That's how empires are built." The way she said it, like she knew exactly what building an empire looked like, gave me pause. But I didn't pry. I figured everyone had their secrets. She started helping me around the shop. She wasn't strong enough to lift tires or change oil, but she organized invoices, cleaned out parts bins, and even suggested a new inventory system that saved me hours every week. "You're good at this," I told her. "I used to run things," she said softly. "Big things." A shadow returns. 3 weeks after I found her, my garage phone rang. It was unusual. Most of my customers either showed up in person or texted. The number was blocked. I answered. "Is this Freedom Motors?" a deep voice asked. "Yeah." "Who's asking?" "You found something that doesn't belong to you. Let her go." Click. I stared at the receiver, my pulse racing. I looked over at Clara, who was wiping down tools. Her hands were shaking. "They found me," she said, almost too quiet to hear. My first instinct was to run, but where? We had no resources, no backup. But Clara was calm. Too calm. "I have to disappear again," she said. "For real this time." "No," I said, firmer than I meant. "Not until I know you're safe. You've done enough. You don't owe me anything." "I'm not doing this because I owe you," I said. "I'm doing it because I choose to." She looked at me for a long moment. Then, to my shock, she pulled out a silver flash drive from her boot. "If anything happens to me," she said, handing it over, "take this to the media." "What is it?" "Everything. Financials, documents, proof of what they did to me, and how much they stole." I took it slowly, realizing this wasn't just about keeping her safe anymore. It was about exposing something far bigger than either of us. That night we made a plan. She would leave, go underground. I would stay put, keep the flash drive hidden. If she didn't contact me in a week, I'd go public. We packed a small bag, and just before dawn, I walked her to the edge of town. She looked at me like she wanted to say something, like a million words were fighting to get out. Instead, she kissed my cheek and whispered, "Thank you for seeing me." Then she was gone. The fall, the next few days were a blur. I was exhausted, paranoid, and broke. With Clara gone, my already weak motivation vanished. I made careless mistakes. Lost 2 clients. My utility bill tripled because of an old AC unit that finally quit. Then the eviction notice came. Everything was falling apart. But I didn't go to the media. I didn't touch the flash drive. I waited, like I promised. Exactly 7 days later, I woke up to the sound of tires on gravel. I opened the garage door, and there she was. But this wasn't the Clara I knew. She stepped out of a matte black SUV, wearing a tailored blazer, sunglasses, and a presence so commanding it made me forget to breathe. Behind her stood 2 men in suits and a woman with a clipboard. "Hi," she said, smiling. "Miss me?" She looked like someone who owned the building I worked in. Gone were the tattered jeans and oversized coat. Clara, or whoever she really was, stood in my gravel lot with posture straight as steel, eyes sharp with purpose. She crossed the distance, between us as if it were a red carpet. I stood dumbfounded, covered in grease, rag in hand. "Clara." She pulled off her sunglasses, revealing those same eyes I'd watched flicker with fear just a week ago. But now, there was no fear, just fire. "My real name is Ilara Voss," she said, like she was reclaiming it from the shadows. "And I never forgot what you did for me." I stared at her, brain scrambling to connect the dots. "Ilara? Voss?" I echoed. "As in, Voss Holdings? Voss International?" She nodded. "That's impossible. You're supposed to be dead," she said matter-of-factly. "According to every major news outlet." I leaned against the garage wall, heart racing. Ilara Voss was one of the most high-profile names in the business world, an heiress to a global empire known for biotech, finance, and energy. Her parents had died in a plane crash when she was 19, leaving her a vast fortune and a board of directors waiting like vultures. Rumor had it she'd vanished 2 years ago after a mental breakdown. But this woman in front of me looked nothing like a casualty of wealth. "What happened to you?" I finally asked. She took a slow breath. "After my parents died, I was young, unprotected. The board convinced the media I was unfit. They isolated me, froze assets, drugged me, claimed I'd been institutionalized. I tried to fight. They chained me up like a criminal, in my own estate. I escaped 2 months ago, barefoot, alone. That night, in the rain, was the end of everything I knew." "And the start of something else," I murmured. "Yes," she said. "You." The deal, she didn't waste time. Inside my shop, she laid everything out like a strategist preparing for war. Her legal team had collected enough evidence to dismantle the corrupt executives. "The flash drive I'd protected was the final nail in their coffin. They'll fall," she said. "But I won't rebuild the empire the same way. I want something better, something real." I watched as her lawyers pulled up projections, proposals, expansion plans. But I couldn't focus. My mind was stuck on one thing. Why me? "I'm just a mechanic," I said. "I don't belong in skyscrapers and boardrooms." She smiled. "That's exactly why you do." She handed me a file. Inside was a business plan, with my name on it. "Freedom Motors is now a fully funded subsidiary of Voss Ventures," she said. "You'll build your chain, everywhere. You'll train under-resourced kids, hire veterans, pay fair wages, and you'll run it your way." I opened my mouth, stunned. "On one condition," she added. "Let me guess," I said. I have to wear a tie. She laughed. No, you have to believe that you're not just a mechanic. Building the dream, the next year was a blur of acceleration. With Ilara's backing, we opened our first 3 branches in neighborhoods forgotten by big business. Places like where I grew up, where talent existed, but opportunity never arrived. I trained mechanics who'd done time, immigrants who didn't speak English yet, teens on the edge of dropping out. We taught them more than car repair. We taught them how to build a life. Each shop wasn't just a garage, it was a community, and Ilara, she didn't sit back in some tower. She visited the sites, got her hands dirty, ate lunch with the interns and listened like their voices mattered. Because to her, they did. The press had a field day. Heiress partners with former mechanic to reshape blue-collar America. We didn't care. We weren't doing it for headlines. We were doing it because we knew what it was like to be forgotten. The turn one evening, I found her alone at the edge of a rooftop during a launch party for our 10th location. Her heels were off. Her hair, once styled to perfection, danced freely in the breeze. "You okay?" I asked. She nodded, staring out at the city. "Better than I've ever been, but I still don't sleep well." "Still see them?" She didn't answer, but the tension in her jaw said enough. "Sometimes I think," she said softly, "that success isn't about how far you climb. It's about how many times you refuse to stay down." I stepped beside her. "You didn't just survive," I said. "You created something better from the ashes." She turned to me, eyes glistening. "So did you." In that moment, I realized the truth. Ilara wasn't the girl who needed saving. She was the storm that cleared the sky. Recognition. 3 years later, we were honored at a national business summit. Ilara took the stage in a black jumpsuit, unapologetically powerful. She spoke not of profits or projections, but of dignity, grit, and second chances. Then, to my shock, she called me up beside her. "This man," she said, placing a hand on my shoulder, "believed in me when I had nothing, no title, no name, just scars." The room fell silent. "But more than that," she continued, "he reminded me that greatness doesn't wear a suit. Sometimes it wears a grease-stained shirt and shows up at 6 a.m. just to keep the lights on." A standing ovation followed. I didn't cry, not then, but I felt it in my bones, the shift. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was leading. The legacy we expanded to 32 locations, then 60, then international partnerships. The Freedom Foundation, our nonprofit arm, launched scholarships and apprenticeship programs across the country. We changed the trajectory of thousands of lives, mechanics, engineers, managers, community leaders. Every time someone asked how it started, I told them the truth. One rainy night, I found a girl chained like an animal behind my garage. I didn't know she was a billionaire heiress. I just knew she needed someone. But Ilara always corrected me. "No," she'd say, "I found you. And together, we found purpose." 5 years. That's how long it took to turn a forgotten lot into a legacy. Some days I still woke up expecting to hear the rumble of that old Chevy outside my rusted garage door, to hear my landlady shouting about late rent, to count change before buying dinner. But those days were long gone. And even now, after the Forbes covers, the White House invitations, the international speaking tours, I still felt most like me when I walked through one of our shops, oil on the floor, jokes flying between apprentices, sparks leaping from welding machines. That smell of grit and growth always brought me home. But the world didn't stop evolving. Neither did we. The heiress who rewrote the playbook, Ilara Voss, was no longer just a name whispered through corporate corridors. She had become a symbol, not of wealth, but of rebellion with a purpose. She dismantled her empire and rebuilt it around impact. Instead of boardrooms run by cutthroats, she promoted leaders who came from the field, people who had once been marginalized or underestimated. She funded ventures that bet on the impossible, clean water in deserts, AI for public education, rehabilitation programs inside prisons. But her favorite project remained Freedom Motors. She told reporters it reminded her that empires weren't built with money, they were built with belief, and she never forgot where she'd been found. In the rain, in the dark, chained to silence. The wedding, no one expected. We never planned it like a fairy tale. There were no horses, no gowns sewn from diamonds, no castles rented for the weekend. Just a windswept hilltop, our closest friends, and the original mechanic's jacket I wore the night I found her. Alara didn't want a crown. She wore a leather bracelet made by a 10-year-old girl from our community school. You pulled me out of chains, she said as we exchanged vows, and gave me back my name. I held her hands. You gave me something too, a reason to stop hiding. The kiss that followed didn't just seal a marriage, it sealed a mission. Returning to the beginning, a decade after we started, I returned to the place that held my past. The gas station I used to sleep behind was now a freedom cafe staffed by single moms, veterans, and young adults transitioning out of foster care. The old diner across the street, once the only place I could afford coffee, had become our local headquarters. And the alley where I found her? We turned it into a community garden. A steel sculpture stood at its entrance, two hands breaking open a chain, one reaching toward the other. A small plaque beneath it read, "When you reach into the dark to help someone, sometimes you find the light yourself." A letter to myself. Wrote a letter once. To the version of me who wanted to give up. I keep it in my jacket pocket. You think this is the end. You think no one sees you. But what if I told you the world is about to change because of you? One act of kindness will become your crown. You'll help millions. You'll love deeply. You'll stand beside a queen you found in the mud. Don't quit. Not today. Future. You sometimes, I read it when doubt creeps in. Sometimes I give copies to others. Sometimes, Alara just looks at me across the table and whispers, "You still carry it?" And I nod, because I remember what it felt like to be forgotten. Legacy in motion freedom. Motors didn't just thrive, it transformed. We developed electric trucks designed by formerly incarcerated engineers. Our training academies were adopted as national models. The White House declared our initiative a blueprint for economic justice. But the real reward? Seeing someone walk through the door of one of our centers with slumped shoulders and walk out with fire in their eyes. We didn't give handouts. We gave people themselves back. That's a different kind of wealth, the kind no one can steal. The girl in the rain, every year on the night she escaped, we returned to that alley. No press, no cameras, just the two of us, hands clasped, hearts still stunned by the journey. "I thought I was broken," she once whispered. "You were never broken," I said. "You were just buried." By what? Fear, lies, chains. But underneath, she turned to me. "What?" I smiled. "You were always a queen." And in the silence that followed, I realized she'd never needed saving. She just needed someone to remind her of who she was. Final reflection. If someone told me all those years ago that I'd become a self-made billionaire, not from stocks or schemes, but from service, I'd have laughed. But I learned that wealth isn't measured by what you accumulate. It's by what you awaken in yourself, in others, in the world. I was just a mechanic. She was just a chained girl in the rain. And yet, from that unlikely moment, we built an empire of second chances.